Hi, my name is Jason Geffner. I'm a senior security researcher and chief taco scientist with CrowdStrike, where my job is to reverse engineer malware and exploits developed by nation-state adversaries and organized crime groups. I also do intelligence research to try to attribute malware, exploits, tools, and C2 protocols to unique actors. Before I was at CrowdStrike, I was a principal security consultant with NGS Secure, and prior to that, I was a reverse engineer on Microsoft's anti-malware team, where I was the owner of the malicious software removal tool. And today I'm here to talk with you about a new technology that we developed named Tortilla. And if the video gentleman could come back, it seems like the right part of the screen is cut off, and that might make some slides hard to read with architectural diagrams. Well, I'll continue in the process. So, security researchers have a growing need for anonymity. Oftentimes we need to communicate with C2 servers to know what commands the attacker is sending to malware. Other times, if we're analyzing a Trojan downloader, that looks great, thank you. If we're analyzing a Trojan downloader, we want to see what malware is being sent out by a malicious website. We want to do this anonymously, and actually it turns out that oftentimes we want to remain anonymous even if we're doing non-technical research. So oftentimes at CrowdStrike we have the need to do research on the blogs and websites that are run by a given attacker. Maybe they're talking about a new vulnerability that they discovered that they say they're going to put into a new malware sample soon, or they're bragging about some hack that they did recently that was against one of our existing or potential customers. We want to be able to connect to these malicious websites or these adversaries' websites for two reasons. We want to do this anonymously though. We don't want our personal information, our personal IP address getting leaked out because we don't want the bad guys to know that we're the ones behind the research. And secondly, we also don't want the bad guys to see that someone's connected to them from, say, a crowdstrike.com IP address to tip off the bad guys that they're being watched anyway. Now, for many years, security researchers and others have been using a technology called TOR to provide for online anonymity. The TOR project consists of TOR software and a global TOR network, which together allow users to anonymously route their traffic through the internet. The TOR software and usage of the TOR network are both free, and the TOR network consists of over 4,000 relay servers. Well, before I talk about Tortilla, I want to talk a little more about how TOR itself works. So the first step is that the TOR client gets a list of TOR nodes from a TOR directory server. And when it wants to communicate with a remote server, it routes its internet traffic via an encrypted protocol through these TOR nodes, and the last node before that final server is called the TOR exit node. Now, all the traffic up until the communication between the TOR exit node and the final server is all encrypted. It's only decrypted at the endpoint. And secondly, the server only sees the IP address of that final TOR exit node. It does not see the IP address of the client itself, thereby providing for anonymity. Now, if later on the client wants to connect to a different server, then the client chooses a different route through the TOR nodes to reach that other server. Now, when most people nowadays use TOR, they do it through something called the TOR browser bundle. Now, the TOR browser bundle consists of both TOR and a modified version of Firefox. So TOR, the client itself, runs a SOCKS server listening on TCP port 9050 and allows connections to be made to that SOCKS port, and any connections that run through that SOCKS port are automatically routed through TOR. But there are some problems with the TOR browser bundle. Firstly, it only works with Firefox. No other browsers are natively supported by the TOR browser bundle, and this could be an issue for security-conscious users. And because Firefox had more than 6 times the number of vulnerabilities identified in it over the past 2 years than did Internet Explorer. Now, secondly, the TOR browser bundle for Firefox with that doesn't work with plugins. And this is also a problem. Let's see, what does this mean? No plugins, so no Silverlight. All right, that might not be too bad if we can't use Silverlight. No Java. That's probably a good thing though. It also means no Flash. And while HTML5 is set to replace Flash, the reality is that right now, many of the most commonly visited websites do rely on Flash. Secondly, looking at the TOR client itself, it's hard to find networked applications that will natively support TCP proxying. And even if you do have a networked application that supports proxying, chances are it probably doesn't support DNS proxying as well via SOCKS. So what would the ideal solution look like? Well, firstly, we'd want to transparently route all TCP and DNS traffic through TOR. We don't want to require any networked application to have native support for TOR. Next, we don't want to allow any traffic onto the internet unless it goes through TOR. In other words, no packet should ever touch a network card unless it's going through TOR. Everything else should be dropped. Thirdly, like it or not, Windows has a 90% market share on desktop computers right now, which means that most users out there aren't familiar with operating systems other than Windows, at least not for desktops. So we don't want to require a user to use an operating system that they're not already familiar with, and chances are they're already familiar with Windows. We also don't want to allow malware to circumvent the TOR tunnel and communicate directly with the internet. And if you look at the TOR browser bundle, if you're using Firefox and go to a malicious website and Firefox gets exploited, well, that exploit could install malware, and the malware could then circumvent your TOR tunnel, thereby divulging your IP address and defeating the whole purpose of using TOR to begin with. And lastly, we want this to be free, right? We don't want to require the user to pay for extra hardware or pay for extra RAM to support multiple virtual machines. Right now, solutions do exist that set up a virtual machine as a dedicated TOR gateway, but running that virtual machine, again, costs RAM, and RAM is not free. So we want to make this as simple as possible and as cost-effective as possible. So what are some non-ideal solutions that already exist? Non-ideal based on the previous slides' ideal requirements. Well, there are hardware-based transparent proxies. Solutions like OnionPy and Portal work really well, but they require additional hardware, and as you all know, hardware isn't free. Secondly, even if you did want to use one of these solutions, it's still possible for suitably privileged malware to hop to a different Wi-Fi network, thereby circumventing the TOR tunnel and divulging the researcher's IP address. And there are also software-based transparent proxies, but the downside, they can't be used with Windows, at least not just using Windows, because transparent proxying with TOR, it is an option, but it works through devpf, which is not something that can be used with Windows. So we could use a non-Windows operating system on a host, or we could use an additional VM such as Unix, but those would again require the user to use an operating system with which they may not already be familiar. There are operating systems dedicated specifically to anonymizing one's actions, such as Tails, but again, it's not Windows-based. And then there are Windows-based solutions like TORCAP that works through hooking WinSock, but again, the problem is malware, if it's running at a high enough privilege level, it could circumvent those WinSock hooks and again, route traffic not through TOR and divulge the user's IP address. Which begs the question, how can we securely wrap TOR around traffic? The answer is tortilla. Now, before I explain how the architecture of tortilla works, I want to read a short disclaimer. Tortilla is produced independently from the TOR anonymity software and carries no guarantee from the TOR project about quality, suitability, or anything else. Okay, that said, let's see how it works. Tortilla consists of two components, the tortilla client, which runs in user mode on the host Windows system, and the tortilla adapter, which runs in kernel mode. Networked applications are run in a virtual machine so that malicious code can circumvent the TOR tunnel to the internet and can't discover identifying information on the host system. And because of the design of tortilla, we can use any virtual machine platform we want, whether it be VMware, Hyper-V, VirtualBox, Virtual PC, etc. And we can use any operating system in the guest virtual machine we want. Chances are a user using Tortilla would be using Windows in their guest as well, but they could use Linux instead or what have you. When you install Tortilla, it creates a virtual network adapter and disables all network component bindings except for that of the virtual TOR network bridge. Now this guarantees that other networked applications on the host system won't be able to interfere with the data being read from or written to, or sent from or sent to, the networked applications on the virtual machine. After the user runs Tortilla the first time, they configure their VM platform to bridge the TCP, the VM's virtual network card to the Tortilla adapter. And the Tortilla client consists of several components itself. So the client receives all layer 2 network traffic from the VM's virtual network card and contains a DHCP server and an ARP responder, very basic ones. And these are just so that the virtual machine can get an IP address. It also comes with a DNS server. The Tortilla DNS server watches for DNS requests from the virtual machine, repackages them as requests over TOR, and asks the TOR exit node to do the DNS resolution for the client. And the Tortilla client receives the response from TOR and repackages it as a DNS response, sends it back to the virtual machine, totally transparently to the networked application in the virtual machine. And the Tortilla client also makes use of the open source lightweight IP stack for proxying TCP sessions between the virtual machine and TOR. And you'll notice that through the entire architecture here, no packets from the virtual machine ever touch the host's actual network driver. Only thing touching the network driver is TOR itself. So Tortilla is not only open source, it also supports both 32-bit and 64-bit host systems, everything from Windows XP and on. And installation and usage could not be easier. Tortilla ships as a single executable, tortilla.exe, and when it's run, it extracts an ini file if it didn't already exist on disk, extracts a 32-bit or 64-bit driver as necessary, and extracts and executes a driver installer. And this installer installs or updates the Tortilla device and driver, and disables all the other network bindings that are not used by the given virtual machine platform. Once everything's set up, the Tortilla client establishes a secure communication channel to the Tortilla driver, and the Tortilla client begins listening for packets from the virtual machine. As I mentioned earlier, it acts on DHCP, ARP, DNS, and TCP packets. Everything else is completely ignored and dropped. And you have the option of saving all network traffic to and from the virtual machine in a PCAP file on the host system. And it's hard to mess it up too. There's a lot of fail-safe things here. The user can run TOR before or after starting Tortilla. Same with the virtual machine, before or after Tortilla. And they can configure the virtual machine platform's network bridge before or after starting Tortilla. And uninstallation is a breeze as well. All that you have to do is delete tortilla.exe, delete the ini file, and uninstall the Tortilla adapter from the Windows Device Manager. Okay, let's see it in action. So, first thing I want to do though is make sure I have my network connection here. And it appears that I do. Great. Okay, so first step, we're going to run TOR. This is the standard TOR client that I downloaded from torproject.com. And we're bootstrapped 100%. Great, TOR is running. Next step, we're going to run tortilla.exe. So here I have my list of network adapters before running tortilla. And when I run tortilla.exe, so because tortilla is still in beta, we're not yet signing it with a non-test signed certificate. So if you download tortilla today, you're going to have to ensure that your system is set up to allow test signed certificates, test signed drivers rather. But of course, since we're releasing it open source, you can sign it yourself with your own legitimate certificate. So right now, it's installing the driver and changing the network bindings. You can see that the tortilla adapter was created as a network adapter, right there. And once the bindings are done, we'll be notified that we're good to go. All right, everything looks good. Now we can look at our network connections and see that we have the tortilla adapter right here. If we look at the properties, we can see that all network bindings are disabled except for that of our VMware bridge protocol. And this is actually set up to work with not just VMware, but also Hyper-V, Virtual PC, and VirtualBox. It will detect and work with all of them. Okay, so now let's set up our virtual network platform's virtual network editor. We're going to add a new virtual network, and we're going to bridge it to our newly installed tortilla adapter. So that's going to be on VMnet 0. Now at that setup, all we have to do is open our virtual machine, change its settings to connected, and we tell it to use the new VM network we just set up that's connected, that's bridged rather, to the tortilla adapter. All right, so we already got an IP address, it was that quick. And we see that queries from the virtual machine are already being resolved via tortilla. So I'll just say public network. That looks good. And I'm going to resize this a bit. Okay. So let's do some demos. Let's see this in action. So the first thing is let's see where it looks like we're coming from. Going to this website, geoiptool.com. And it looks like we're coming from politkovskaja.torservers.net. An anonymous proxy. It actually couldn't even get didn't determine a country for us. So our IP, oh, no, it did. It looks like we're in Africa? All right. Well, welcome to the ocean, everybody. We're out of Vegas. So I mentioned earlier that with the TOR browser bundle, Flash does not work. Let's see if Flash works with tortilla. Oh, it's set to English for us. Oh no, Rickroll! So yes, it does work with Flash. All right, let me close that quickly, it's pretty loud. Okay, so Flash works, as will anything that's a networked application. So what about, okay, so web browsing works, but we could already do most web browsing we need to do with the TOR browser bundle anyway. What about Telnet or SSH? Well, it looks like it works. Yeah, so SSH works fine with tortilla. Let's see. What's my IP address? 173.254.216.68. 68. 216.68. 68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. 216.68. Looks like exit-o1c.noisetor.net is where I'm coming from. Looks anonymized to me. What about SFTP? Does that work? See the connections being made on the left, DNS requests being resolved, setting our password now, we're connected, getting a directory listing. So there really aren't any TCP-based applications that shouldn't work at all. Here we have now our SFTP client running over TOR. Cool, so let's go back to the slides. Okay, so the good news. Not only is it free and open source, but it's ready right now. The beta is out. It's live on our website. It's free for you to download at crowdstrike.com/community-tools. To wrap it up, it's a free and open source solution for Windows. Doesn't require anything but Windows if you don't want to use it. That will transparently route all TCP and DNS traffic through TOR. It doesn't put anything on the network without going through TOR. And it doesn't require any extra hardware or any extra virtual machines to act as a TOR gateway. Nor does it allow malware to circumvent the tunnel. So I'll be happy to take questions and answers if we have time, and a proctor can say if that's true or not. But before I do, I want to give special thanks for several people at CrowdStrike for the help on this. John Costello was invaluable for testing. Cameron Gutman rewrote the entire driver for Tortilla because he's much better at writing drivers than I am. And Alex, Sven, Dan, Kyle, and Aaron were also very helpful with the code review and their input as well. So definitely a team effort. And thank you for that. So with that, a proctor can tell me if we do have time for Q&A. Got about 4 minutes. So with that, I'm happy to take 4 minutes worth of questions. So the question is, Tor browser bundle is designed to purposely block plugins and Flash because it doesn't want to divulge the user's identity. Well, the reason that the Tor browser bundle does that is because typically the Tor browser bundle is not run from inside of a virtual machine. So Flash has some functionality that may allow it to get the user's IP address in ways that wouldn't be caught by the Tor browser bundle hooks. Similarly, other plugins could also get users' information on from their system, identifying information such as IP address or maybe their username without relying on the anonymity that something like Tortilla provides by being set inside of, or having the user's actions be inside of a virtual machine. So there is no risk using plugins in the virtual machine with Tortilla.
Have you actually tried running rats inside Tortilla to see if your IP gets exposed to these ghosts?
Yeah, so we did some dynamic testing with real malware, and it does work in the sense that it is able to communicate with the attacker's command control server, and because it is being routed through Tor, our identity is kept confidential. So yes, it does work, as long as the C2 protocol is being routed over TCP. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that the adversary can't tell that it's being routed through Tor. The list of Tor exit nodes that we're using is public. So the fact that we're going through Tor is not a secret, but our identity is. Be happy to. So the URL slide is right here. crowdstrike.com/community-tools. You're welcome. So all UDP traffic is dropped except for DNS requests. And they have to be well-formatted DNS requests. If they're not well-formatted, they're dropped. But ICMP, IGMP, Anything that's not specifically TCP or a DNS-based UDP packet is dropped. Oh, and ARP and DHCP go to the Tortilla client, but not out to Tor or over the network otherwise.
Will it maintain sessions, web sessions?
We'll maintain web sessions. Yes, web sessions are at a higher OSI level that the browser will handle through cookies. So web sessions would not be an issue for Tortilla. It would maintain them. Okay, well, I think I'm out of time now, but thank you for coming. If you have any questions, please come up to me. It was a pleasure.